Hello and welcome to Inside the Majors, episode 5 of 2024. I'm your regular host, Garren Batten. Today we'll be starting with the regular driver interview, and then that'll be followed by a discussion around some of the issues that iRacing have had in the last week, as well as some directions that some of the panel think that iRacing could potentially take developments in the future. Some of the preferences that we'd like to see in terms of enhancements and additions to the service. So we'll get right to the interview here in a second after this. This week's driver interview is our current sports silver leader in the Pacific Division, Austin O'Neill. Austin currently has a 150-point lead in the standings at the halfway mark of the season. Has been a regular in top split in all but one race this season. So, Austin, what's been the highlight of the 2024 Major Series for you so far?
Besides the 150-point lead in the Sportsman Silver Division, I'd have to say my third place finish at the Daytona 500 is my best finish of the year, so I kind of automatically go to that when someone asks what my highlight is. But every race that I've been a part of has been a good race, and I've left on good terms. But that's just kind of like the cherry on top before we head into the second part of the season.
Finishing the top three at Daytona has always got a story to tell, particularly towards the end of the race. Was it a bit of a come through the firing mess of the last corner for you, or how did that one pan out for you?
That's exactly how that one panned out for me. So I'm not a good super speedway racer at all. Like, especially with the new Gen car. With the Gen 6 car, I was okay, but I just was not comfortable pushing or being pushed at all. So I just, for the entire race, I just tried to kind of keep myself in a somewhat safe position. I mean, there's no safe place at Daytona, but I just kind of rode up front as much best I could, and the last, I think, 50 laps kind of played out in my hands. I was able to kind of avoid some wrecks and was in the top 10 with a couple to go. And the last, I think, pit stop, the front 10 or front 12 cars got separated into two packs. So I got lucky and was in the top or the front pack. And I think Christian Challoner ran out of fuel coming off of 4, and I was luckily not in his lane. So when he ran out, he stacked up the outside lane. I got by him. I think that put me in like third or fourth coming off of 4, and just kind of drag raced to the finish line and was able to get third. I think I was close to second, just a little short from the win, but to survive that and come out with the podium, I was pretty ecstatic to say the least.
I've always wanted to have a heart rate monitor on people when that happens to see just how far their heart rate spikes as they come through the mess, and realize that a massive result's on the cards.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I'll have to go back now and look at my Apple Watch to see what I had on for heart rate wise towards the end of that. It's funny you kind of mentioned that too. Is before the start of the major season, I ran the Daytona 24 with my teammate Bryce and a buddy of ours, Chris, and we actually had a heart rate monitor on for most of that race, and we were around like 120 or so beats. It was pretty calm, not as wild as the 500 went, but yeah, it'd be kind of an interesting stat to look at, towards the end of that race.
Yeah, as I've said before, the cars might be pretend, but the competition and the excitement and the adrenaline is real.
100%. I've been fortunate enough to race outside of sim racing. I've raced my entire life, been in a family that's raced since the 50s. So I will stand by this, and I'll say it every single time. There's times where I get into a sim race and I'm more nervous starting the sim race than I am starting a real race, my racing career with the sprint cars that I ran towards the end of my full-time, career in the past couple of years. But it's like it. I ran, some pretty high-end, like somewhat crown jewel events in this region, and yeah, I was more nervous to run any majors race than probably any of my sprint car races towards the end there. But it's crazy, like how I guess your attitude or your nerves kind of change when you get into the sim.
So your real racing career, give us a little bit more detail around what you've done with that. You said you've finished up now. What did you do? Where did you race? And what's led you to end that now?
Yeah, so I've done all kinds of stuff. I started off when I was a young kid, 5 years old, racing karts, and did that nationally. I just did dirt karts, nothing on the asphalt side. I moved up to micro sprints. We just got those on iRacing, so that's pretty cool to see those on the service. Something that I have seat time and check time in, and then the next step was wing 360 sprint cars. So it was really cool. That's actually how I got into iRacing. So 2016, they brought dirt out, sprint cars and all that, and I was just a year or two away from moving into full-size sprint cars at that time. So it was kind of a perfect match to hop in the sim and get some seat time in before that. But my racing career is not 100% over at the moment. I'm just kind of like taking a break from it, starting a career, and kind of focusing on some personal life stuff. And I know one day here soon I'll start the team back up again and we'll go racing again. But it's just kind of on a temporary pause at the moment.
Speaking of temporary pauses, you first joined the majors in 2018, but then had quite a break and then have come back this year. So can you remember what led you to join the major series all those years ago? And give us a bit of a rundown on what happened in that space between when you first started racing majors and when you've come back this year.
Yeah, so it was I think 2018 was my first season with the series, and my close friend and teammate now Bryce Roberts and I were on one night, and he was just kind of searching the forums and ran across the major series and thought it was a really cool series and an idea. A lot of different cars and tracks, all types of different racing disciplines, on top of being full distance races and some endurance races in there too. So it's just kind of appealing, something different from our dirt kind of background to go do and really kind of test our skills. So did that. I think I ran pretty much, I think 75% or so the schedule in 2018. I really don't remember too much about it. And then we ran in 2019. I think kind of part-time. We also got linked up with Riding Shotgun Motorsports and Blake Reynolds. So looking back on that now, I wish I was a little more involved with it, seeing the kind of talent and skill level all those guys in that team had at that time. And I really kind of wish I would have maybe learned a little bit from them and taken some notes. But still, it was a really cool experience, back then with them. And it was really cool to bring Bryce along with me. We're two close friends, and that was a really cool experience. So 2019 ended, and then 2020 came around, and Bryce and I we both moved at the same time, and we lost our good internet connection. So uh, we had to kind of take a break for a little bit. And at that time, my racing was kind of starting to pick up a little bit too, so I didn't have too much free time. So I took a break for a couple years, and then I think last year Bryce got his internet back going again and joined Fractal Velocity's team, and had a pretty good season. And was talking to me in the off season and mentioned that they were kind of looking for another driver for this season to go for a team championship. They were just one short last year, and asked if I'd be interested in it. And kind of with me taking a step back from my full-time racing and kind of wanting to get more into sim racing, I thought it was a perfect opportunity. And about a month before the season started, I decided we were going to go do this full time, and have been pretty excited ever since.
And it's a pretty good championship battle with Fusion Silver, I see in your division. So yeah, it's a great little fight that you've got going, and you could argue your performances is the difference in that head-to-head battle, because after you, it's Fusion and Fractal Velocities very close together in the next 6 positions after you. So yeah, that'll be a great one to watch over the rest of the season.
Yeah, I kind of coming into the season, I really wasn't sure kind of where I would stack up. I knew if I made top split, pretty much every race, I would have a shot, maybe a top 3 or top 5 in the championship. Kind of based, I was kind of looking at Bryce's stats and talking to him, after last season and kind of what he did and where he ended up. So I just knew if I was, consistent and had good top split finishes, I was going to be hopefully in the hunt. And we came out of the race at Fuji, the Predator race, and I was kind of blown away that I was the highest finishing Sportsman driver, and I was leading it with a good lead. And I'm like, all right, now it's kind of on me to maintain this and keep it going. And I think heading to the rest this year, at least for my side, going for the championship, I just need to continue that consistency and keep everything, kind of under control and maintain the best I can and not make any wild mistakes or have a bad finish. And then also too, I'm kind of looking at, what we can do as a team to also pick off a team championship. But also I'd like to see, the rest of our teammates with Sebastian, Mark, Kevin, and Bryce kind of get into the top 5, spots in the drivers championship. So kind of going to be busy and pretty intense to heading into the rest of the year. And we have some good races that I think fit each of our driving styles to round off the season. So I think we have a pretty good chance at having a really good battle of Fusion Silver for the team championship, but also trying to take a top five sweep in the drivers championship.
The upcoming round being on a dirt oval, do you feel your real world experience might give you an edge or some advantage going into that one?
Yeah, I think so. I've taken a pretty good break from dirt racing on the sim for a while. I've found sports car racing and road course racing a couple years ago and absolutely fallen in love with it. So it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve getting back into it and kind of finding some of the techniques that are pretty big to make these things fast at the moment. But I think my sim experience and my real life experience kind of play off heading into Eldora, but a lot of factors that's changed from my last time running a major dirt race back in like 2019 to now. So we're dealing with tire wear, new track model, new tire model. So it's gonna be pretty interesting and different, heading into this round. But I'm always excited for a new challenge.
Did you race in the Majors 24 this year?
I did not. I was out of town that weekend. I believe it was moved back a week, and that landed right on my vacation. So I was pretty bummed to miss that. I was hoping we could bring out a win or a decent finish because our Bryce and I and Chris, our other team, we won the 24 at Daytona this year. So we are kind of hoping to kind of bring that mojo and speed to the majors 24 and hopefully pick up a win, but it didn't really fall in our hands with our schedule. So we definitely have it circled on our calendar for next year.
And maybe the 12-hour race blackout at the end of the season, if that works out for you as well, might be a good one for you guys to do.
Yeah, I just seen that this morning, so it's pretty exciting that that's going to come up at the end of the year, and yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Outside of sim racing, what do you enjoy watching or consuming? Is it the stuff that you've been involved with, or do you more get into some more mainstream stuff in terms of just watching on TV or going to events?
Uh, a little bit of both. So, I've always been a dirt guy at heart. It's like right now I'm watching the King's Royal weekend out at Eldora. So yeah, I still have a kind of a foot in with the dirt side of stuff. But here in the recent years, like I said, I've since getting more involved with road course racing and iRacing, I've definitely paid more attention to like IMSA, WEC, and Formula One, and was never really a fan of it in the past, and I've been missing out on it for a long time now, and I wish I would have got into it sooner. But it's a really cool and unique type of motorsport. All three of those offers, so it's cool, checking that out and becoming a fan of it.
Is there anyone you'd like to mention or thank that's helped or been influential in your major series journey so far?
Yeah, it's all on Bryce Roberts' hands. He's the one that pulled me into the series, back in 2018 and 2019, and he's the one that kind of got me back into it, into this year. And I just can't thank the Fractal Velocities team with Sebastian, Mark, and Kevin for allowing me to come be a part of their team and hopefully, help out delivering them a championship this year. It's been a lot of fun. I've had a couple races that I feel like I could have capitalized on here recently. That's like a funny moment was funny now, not funny back then at the Indianapolis 500. I forgot to unmap or unbind my ignition button for my keyboard, and my cat jumped up and shut it off halfway through the race. So um, that's kind of the laugh of my season so far. But yeah, I just can't thank them for letting me come out and be a part of their team and have fun with them.
It's funny how real world or non on track things can have such an influence in sim racing. Obviously you've had the cat incident, and our guest on the last podcast, Tom Guest, I know that he had a keyboard update kick in the middle of his Indy 500 as well. So yeah, these things do happen.
Yeah, I the cats jumped up and turned my PC off before, so I had a bottle cap sitting over that. So you wouldn't jump up there and mess with it, and totally forgot about my ignition being mapped to my keyboard, and I race in VR. So thank God it was under yellow, because if it was under green, I'd be in a big trouble. But yeah, I heard the car shut off and turned back on a couple times, and before I got my headset off, I had slowed down enough to where the anti-stall clutch kicked in, and I had no chance of restarting it, and I had to tow and go 2 or 3 laps down, and of course, my luck, the last 100 laps of the race, went green to checkered, so I had no chance of getting any laps back. But Yeah, still it was. I was a little heated in the moment, but you look back on it now and you just laugh at it. And I got lucky and came out with some decent points.
To everyone that always thinks, why me? Why does this happen to me? It happens to everyone. We all have to take our turn of having these things occur in the middle of a race that's important to us.
Yeah, I'm glad I got it out early in the season and not down when it's kind of crunch time with some points in the championship on the line.
There you go. A rule for everybody. Make sure the cat is out of the room when you're doing sim racing. Austin, thanks very much for spending a bit of time with us today and telling us about your exploits both in the major series and also in the real world. Good luck for Eldora for the rest of the season to both you and your team. And we're keeping an eye on how things are going. And good luck.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoy the podcast you guys are putting out, and look forward to seeing this episode come out and the future episodes you guys have lined up.
Hey, you know that guy who just before the green flag keys up his mic and asks, "Anybody got a setup?" Well, this is him. This is Adam, and hey, Adam needs some help. On the other hand, this guy over here, this is Steve. Steve is a solid racer and he knows his way around the garage. Steve's problem is time. With a job and a family, he can't find enough time to build competitive setups and to race as often as he likes. But as luck would have it, Steve knows a secret. He lets the Majors Garage crew chiefs do the setup work so he can focus on the racing. At majorsgarage.com, Steve can get setups for over 60 cars on the iRacing service. So no matter what series he wants to jump into, he is covered. Anybody really should tell Adam. See you at the garage.
Okay, so a quick driver change now, although anyone sharing a seat with me is going to need a pretty big booster seat, but to discuss some more general iRacing issues and events. With me, we've got series regular and two-time Majors Series race winner and, at least for today, resident IT guru, Ed Shelley. Hi, Showtime. How's things?
Hey, yeah, good, thanks. I'm glad that you had the stats on how many races I've won and all of that, because I'm so bad at remembering, and I would literally have to open my drawer here and look for coins, of which I have a couple. But yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
Nice to go swimming around in them Scrooge McDuck style if you've got the chance to. Anyway, so
Not quite.
let's start with last week. iRacing had some issues. Not of their making. We definitely need to point that out from the very beginning. That meant that there were several outages. Major Series is a non-affiliated, but you can consider it a third party to iRacing. Obviously, the series uses their platform. There are issues with the result of a DDoS attack, which didn't mean a huge amount to me when I first saw it. But I thought we could discuss what that is, how that works, how it was handled, and that sort of stuff. As somebody who works within the industry and knows what these sorts of things are, can you give us a bit of a layman's rundown on what a DDoS attack is?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as you said, like I work in the tech industry. I'm used to be a software engineer, and this is something that's actually really prevalent. And it's kind of funny watching this week, everybody kind of waking up to these concepts and things that are like generally things that are always going on in the world. Like these kind of attacks are just constantly happening out there, and some of them cause problems, some of them don't. And to be honest, it's kind of weird for somebody to target a service like iRacing because it's, I don't want to say the G word, but it's effectively like a video game, right? That people are playing for enjoyment. But it's obviously also not the first time that iRacing has had problems, and I actually think they've faced some DDoS attacks in the past. I was like digging through old forum posts and things. So what does this mean? Maybe we can just talk about what this actually is and what causes it in the first place. So first of all, if you're a cool kid, you call it DDoS. So there you go. There's a freebie for you. It's a distributed denial of service attack. And what that basically means is somebody out there is coordinating a bunch of computers of some kind, and we'll talk about what those computers can be in a second, because that's also interesting. So they're coordinating a huge number of different computers to basically overwhelm the iRacing servers. And so you can think of this like the most simple possible version of this would be if I call up all my friends today and say, hey, like in 20 seconds, let's all frantically go to the iRacing website and hit refresh at the same time, right? So anytime I load a web page or log into a service or, join a race server, there's communication between, your machine or the iRacing app specifically and iRacing servers. And usually that's fine, right? Your computer sends a request to iRacing, they respond and say, okay, you're a logged in user, you can join this race server. The problem comes when the number of people doing that all at the same time, like massively scales up to a huge number. And that's essentially what people are doing here is just like sending millions and millions of requests to some iRacing servers. I actually don't know which parts of the service they're attacking. It seems to maybe be more than one. But the result of that is the service essentially gets overwhelmed. And it's a very similar like effect to if any of you have kind of raced special events over the years. There's been a few big special events where there's been a problem when everyone registers at the same time. And actually, before they made some changes more recently, it was a more common thing where everything just kind of crashes or grinds to a halt because there's just too many people hammering the register button at the same time.
I think Daytona 22 was the crowning glory of that one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was something like, what, nearly 30 hours of trying to register for Daytona and doing the race, right?
Oh, it sure felt like it by the end, yeah.
So this is something that people do. A lot of people refer to it as like a hack or like an exploit, but it's to be honest, not really hacking because it's really quite a dumb approach to just kind of overwhelming the servers in a way that is not super sophisticated technologically. I think one thing that is interesting is a lot of the time the way that you would do this is to use multiple clients, like different computer systems across the web. And quite often those are computer systems that have been hacked, right? So you can basically control what is known as like a botnet and tell all of these computers in this network to send a request to a single server at the same time. And when we say computers there, the interesting thing is actually a lot of the time they're not even computers in the kind of classical sense, but internet connected devices. Today, almost everything is like a smart device that's connected to the internet in some way. And a lot of those things are hackable. So whether it's your smart TV, your fridge, your washing machine. So yeah, in other words, your washing machine might be pinging requests to iRacing right now and causing the servers to crash. It's kind of scary.
That's an amazing concept, especially given how hard, as a family of 5, we work our washing machine. If it then had to go off and do things like, hack things around the world, yeah, I can see why it takes so long to wash our clothes. One of the things that you raised there, pinging the server or pinging the service. We're not talking about trying to overwhelm it with a number of logins, right? There's other backdoors or other ways into and I'm doing air quotes, which doesn't really work great on a podcast, but other ways into the back end of the iRacing system, such as data requests, things like that. Is that the sorts of avenues that these sorts of attacks are going to be going through?
Yeah, it's sometimes happening at the login layer, although that's usually a little bit more sophisticated because you're involving like credentials and things. But the challenging thing here is, yeah, as you said, there is like, let's say there's a race scheduling server in iRacing that normally you wouldn't interact with directly at all, right? Because it's just part of the whole system. That server sits there on the internet and accepts requests from, in theory, anywhere. If you send a request to that server, it has to reply in some way. And even if the request that you send to it is absolute trash and completely unauthorized, you're not an allowed service, it still takes some effort or resources for the server to actually reply to that request, even if it's just no, you're not legit. And so it doesn't really matter if they're legitimate requests or not. Like once you have like a certain number or a certain scale of these requests coming in, it's more about just like overwhelming the infrastructure that has to like route all of these requests to the right place to the point where it just kind of grinds to a halt.
Not even a case of just, no, you can't come in, so we're going to block any requests from this IP address or that sort of thing. It's literally, like, even if somebody is coming from an address that the server has realized, I don't want to take any traffic from this IP address, then it still has to in some way handle that. And so by just overloading it, even with things that it knows are not legitimate, it just can't handle it. That is, am I sort of understanding that right?
Yeah, so we're obviously simplifying a bit here, right? And we don't know the like minute details of what these people are actually doing. But yeah, I think like if you imagine you have a a doorway that's designed to accept like 10 people through per minute, and then suddenly you've got like 20,000 people trying to go through that doorway. The challenge you have is that the vast majority of people going through that doorway are actually just assholes that are trying to like crash your service, but it's very difficult to, or it's almost impossible to detect who are the genuine people. And obviously the genuine people are being affected at the same time because they also can't get through the doorway. So yeah, it maybe not the best analogy, but it's literally just like overwhelming the infrastructure.
The fact that iRacing is genuinely a global service and takes traffic from all over the world simultaneously, is that something that worked against it in this case? In that, if it had been a service that typically or exclusively services a particular country or a particular geographical region, would the fact that these attacks are coming from all over the world simultaneously, but iRacing is a global service, have worked against it in terms of working out how to deal with this issue?
Yeah, I think you're kind of touching on how do you detect and defend against these attacks. And obviously the first D of the DDoS is the big one here, which means that these requests are completely like distributed geographically. They could be coming from all parts of the world, but they're also distributed in terms of the types of clients that they come from, the types of machines. So like in theory, yes, let's say if iRacing was like a US only service and they were receiving tons of like spam requests from somewhere in Asia, they could just say, okay, we just block any requests from outside the US. And the challenge here is that when obviously being global and the fact that these requests are, they're basically very difficult to distinguish from like normal people that are actually just trying to use the service. It's really, really difficult to identify the kind of attacking requests and block those without actually blocking legitimate people that are just trying to use the service. So this is kind of the main challenge with like defending against these attacks is there's not really like a reliable way to do it. And most of the time, big companies will just take an approach of scaling up their infrastructure enough where it no longer gets overwhelmed by these kind of attacks. But obviously that requires big money in most cases. And it's not really like when I say big money, I'm talking about these are companies that are, the largest tech companies in the world, like Microsoft and Google, who are day to day, like building expertise around like how do they handle hundreds of millions of requests per minute or whatever the volume they have is.
I think iRacing handled things fairly well in terms of being offline. They weren't. There was several instances of them having to take the service down, but certainly to my knowledge, none of them were for super extended periods of time. They managed to find ways to deal with this. Do you think that there's anything that they would have learnt to prevent this from happening in the future, or is that going to be really, really difficult because it's basically you can only be reactive to these sorts of things?
Yeah, I think I'm actually pretty impressed with the way they're handling this, and it's clear that they're scrambling pretty quickly when the attacks happen, and they've obviously made some changes to try and mitigate that. iRacing actually runs on Amazon Web Services, which is the biggest kind of web hosting platform in the world, and most of the internet's servers run on that, so they do provide some tools for mitigating these kinds of things, although as I said, it's pretty challenging. So I think a lot of this is about like how quickly you recover once the attack starts. And we've definitely seen cases of like the attack begins and some servers fall over and there's like a chain reaction where, maybe because the results processing server is not functioning, then something else crashes because it's expecting it to be there. And that's where they can really make improvements to just make the whole thing a bit more robust. But yeah, I'm confident like that they're obviously going to be working with Amazon on this, and I'd assume at some point it makes sense to get the like legal side involved. This kind of thing is, I believe, a federal crime, at least in the US, although it's not very easy to track down the people that are responsible for it.
Also joining us along for the ride today is Mikey O. I'm going to keep introducing you in different ways, mate, until one of them sticks and feels perfect. So hello, O, great and powerful one.
Wow. Good morning.
or evening or good night, wherever you are.
It's super morning for you, so yeah.
Well, these sleepers for the week. So we've been discussing this denial of service attacks that iRacing's been having and what it means and how it operates and that sort of stuff. And one of the things that I'd really like to get your ideas on here, Mike, the Major Series website has never had an attack like this. However, we've had instances of it being overwhelmed, particularly at the end of pre-qualifying for the Majors 24 when everybody's really desperate to see what split that they've got into. How does somebody who's managing a service or a website deal with unexpected spikes, in our case, legitimate, in iRacing's case last week, illegitimate? How do you deal with those spikes that you really just don't normally see from day to day?
In our case, obviously nothing to do with the denial of service, but the platform that our website is on is called Bubble. It's like its own programming language that I use, and you buy so much capacity, and we can up that. And there are certain points where it becomes cost prohibitive to do so, and it's definitely cost prohibitive to do consistently throughout the year. But we try to bump it up the best we can during the heavy loads, which, like you said, is typically during the Majors 24. And usually it falls short a little bit, and we do the best we can. And so we've tried to come up with alternative methods for people to get information, if the website isn't working well. So things like Google Sheets and whatnot. I think fail-safes are a good idea in general, regardless. I think haven't necessarily come up with the best fail-safes, to be honest with you, but and would always look to have different ones. Fail-safes are good regardless. Kind of on the topic of the DDoS and what happens when, even if it's not a denial of service, if the servers just go down. I mean, all leagues, all hosted sessions, that you've got to have sort of a contingency plan in place for what happens if one of our races is impacted. Right, we're in the middle of it, and this happens. So. You're always thinking about what your contingencies are.
So the Major Series website, we have a contingency or at least a potential fail-safe where, in terms of communication of things, we use the Discord servers that we have set up, which everyone's a part of. iRacing doesn't have that opportunity to communicate quite so readily directly to their customers. They have to rely on things like social media and that sort of stuff when these things occur. How do we feel, and I'll open this to both of you, how do we feel iRacing managed the communication of what was actually going on?
I think one thing that's interesting here is thinking about like the motivation of the person or people that are doing this. And it's obviously very hard to guess, but one would assume it's more to try and damage the reputation of iRacing more than anything else. They're certainly not getting any financial gain from this. So I think there's a balance that iRacing has to strike between drawing a ton of attention to it and making it a huge thing versus making sure that people are informed of what's going on. And yeah, I think they've done a pretty good job. I mean, the main thing is just these kind of regular updates if things are ongoing that I think tend to happen on the forum, although perhaps not everybody is actually there on the forum. So yeah, that's been my view. I think they're doing a pretty decent job.
Yeah, I would second that. And that's not just for these, but in general. I mean, there's sort of, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for them in all of these cases. And they have 200,000 plus people. So it's not the same as something like we're dealing with a couple thousand at the most. So it's never going to be as intimate, and the information that they have to get out, it has to be watered down to a degree. You're never going to give super specifics for all the reasons just given, and you're going to try to keep it short, sweet, and simple. And a lot of times people are unsatisfied with that. If you give too much information, obviously it's not necessarily a good thing either.
One of the points that you raised there, Ed, they're not making any money out of this, whoever's behind or whoever had been behind these attacks. There must be a cost involved in actually producing the denial of service attacks on something, correct?
Yeah, there is. Although, in my understanding, in kind of researching this a bit, that cost is surprisingly cheap, surprisingly low, and it's easier than it's ever been to essentially kind of go onto the dark web, pay somebody a bit of money who's then going to coordinate one of these attacks. So, like, yes, it costs, but it's not on the level of, being super prohibitive probably for a lot of people.
Mike, I'll throw a question to you around general development or enhancement or capability. As a series grows, or as iRacing grew and things got larger, what's the priority in terms of getting things bigger to deal with the same things as opposed to developing new things that you can offer to customers?
Right. So you're saying, hey, do you focus on making things more robust, more fail-proof, or do you focus on new stuff? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. iRacing could have spent a lot of money on having far bigger capabilities for the number of people that can log into their service or be involved in a special event, or they could
Yeah.
spend that money on getting the Tempest system up and running. Obviously these, so one is an enhancement to the service, one is making the existing service more robust.
Right.
You're leading the direction in the future of the major series. How do you balance up the enhancement versus? It's almost like a race car, right? How do do you make it faster or do you make it more reliable?
Right.
How do you balance up those?
I think you do both, and I think you alternate, to be totally honest with you. And I think that iRacing has done that as well, and I think that that's something that we strive to do as well. So, for example, you gave a good one where do you make it so that more people can attend? Well, iRacing for a long time had a big issue with special events in terms of the number of people that could participate, because it would just crash their servers every time. It was just a running meme all the time. Every single special event, they would have huge issues, and they did eventually fix that, and it probably did slow down the development of some of the other big projects, i.e. Tempest and things of that nature. I mean, when they released Team Racing, I don't even remember what year it was now. Obviously, that was the precursor to all the special event problems that ended up happening. We didn't typically have those issues with, the Daytona 500s and the Indy 500s prior to Team Racing. Once Team Racing came on and it sort of exploded the popularity of those special events, iRacing had a big problem, and weather and all the other things probably were not on hold, but secondary in priority to making sure that the service actually worked the way they wanted it to. So I would say you've got to make it robust is probably the first priority, but you can't ignore new things you want to do, and so you almost have to alternate.
In terms of new things that iRacing might want to do, I might throw this over to you, Ed. Things that you think that iRacing should be directing development work towards that maybe they have, maybe they should be, maybe we've heard about, maybe we haven't heard about. What sort of direction do you think that the iRacing service should be looking at heading?
Hang on, let me just get my big list out here. Let's be real. iRacing is the best service in the world for online sim racing competition. There's plenty of other racing sims out there, but nothing quite comes close in terms of like real organized, sanctioned racing with good rules and management around the web service part of it. So I actually think it makes sense for them to double down on this thing that is their kind of core competency. I actually believe there's probably a little bit of kind of conflict for them in terms of their business model, because if you think about their incentives, it's really more on the side of like releasing new content. So Cars and Tracks, where they are able to charge members to like purchase those each time they release them, versus really just kind of investing in the core platform. And that's not to say they're not doing that as well, because obviously we've seen things like Rain come along recently, which has been in the works for ages. But I just think there are some really kind of concrete things they could do on the web service side that make this kind of team focused racing even better than it already is, and they're already out in the lead, I think, if you compare it. So let's try to think of some examples there. One would be kind of better like understanding of vehicle damage. So I've lost count of the number of team endurance events we've been in where we knew that we had some damage on our car, but we didn't quite understand like what that damage was, or like how long it would take to fix it. And even when we pit, we still don't understand like what's damaged, and we don't have the option to choose which things we repair and which things we don't. So I would love to see some of that stuff. I think a big pet peeve of mine is like proper reusing of tire compounds. So we can obviously kind of limit tire compounds in a race, but you're not really able to like reuse tires. Just things that make the kind of amp up the realism there, that require probably pretty reasonable investments in these kind of core pieces. We also lost something us people that are interested in more like the strategic side of racing, we really lost something massive a while ago now. I forget when it was, when the change for pit stops to do tires and fuel at the same time came around, because that essentially neutralized any kind of strategy from being able to make the tires last 2 stints, because you no longer had an advantage if you don't change tires at a pit stop, right? So I think I would push on the reuse and limiting tire compounds, because I think that would re-add that strategic element that we kind of lost, which was so good. And I'm saying that as somebody who's good on tires, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but there we go. Like road safety cars would be another huge one, right? They just add a completely new element to the road endurance side. I know we're doing that in majors, and that's actually one of the big reasons why a lot of people race in things like the Majors 24. But yeah, I would prefer to like dial down some of this like new content releases in favor of more of the service part.
I'll put a slightly different slant on that question for you, Mike, and that's, what are the sorts of things that iRacing could be developing that you think would actually be the most beneficial for the Majors series?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost a double-edged sword, because actually, Ed had some great answers, and he sort of alluded to on the racing side, but he also alluded to some really important stuff on the league admin hosted side, whatever you want to call it, with regard to like the safety cars and race control. There's a lot of things that there are third-party tools that are used to manage those things for leagues and whatnot, that honestly I've always been surprised that has not been incorporated into the main service, because given how huge, I mean, they've spent so much time and effort and money on really their three critical components, which is official, which is their biggest one, hosted / league, and now AI. But the tools for league admins has been invisible, completely gone. I mean, there's almost nothing. They don't even have a proper league search area. They must have thousands of leagues. How many are active, I have no idea. But that would be a big one. Number one. Number two would be the safety car process for on road, which would be great and would be good for the iRacing population as a whole. And they should absolutely do it. And I say all of that knowing that would actually damage us, because to what Ed said, we're sort of unique and special in that we take some of those things on. And so I've always been a believer that if it's the harder it is, the less people will do it. So less leagues and organizations will do some of the things that we do, because they aren't plug and play, they aren't easy. But in total truth, iRacing should do them. We should have access to a functioning safety car process on road, one that is customizable and does whatever you want. The tire compound rules need to be a lot more robust, to what Ed was talking about. Just race control in general with regard to issuing penalties, not issuing penalties, the ability to waive, certain black flag types, understanding, that the sim handles them better or worse in certain situations, and just as an admin, the ability to completely change those rules would be fantastic. And to me, those aren't even super complex as far as what they're doing. It's just really low on the priority, obviously. Historically, you have all of these, so many different ways they have done it with regard to protocol, with regard to pit stops or other things, or race control. And why not put that in the hands of the race director? If it's a hosted session, let us decide, can you fuel and tires at the same time? Split it up. Why not? That'd be great. So yeah, let's open that up. Let's really get creative from a strategic perspective, and you can have a lot of fun.
So things like the service attack that they've had last week, that's the sort of thing that's going to push those even further down the priority list, right? Because suddenly you've got a requirement, which is you didn't know that you had, that's going to take a massive amount of resources. And credit to the iRacing people that, this attack happened on the 4th of July. Like, as Mike, you can attest, there is no bigger holiday in the US than the 4th of July. And so, to do it on that day where they had to then start calling staff back in to deal with it on that particular day, this was a huge deal. And it's the sort of thing that they're going to now have to put resources and time and money and effort to stop these sorts of things from happening again, to stop the service from going down. So that pushes things like the nice to haves, which would be how iRacing would look at it. They're not essential. They're not core. They're not falling behind other racing services with things like the safety car and whatever, with weather they were. So they knew that the weather system had to come in. Having service attacks like this, it's pushing things like those nice to haves that we all want further down the list, because iRacing has no choice but to spend time and money on dealing with, assholes, as I think Ed, you put it, which is fair enough. That are doing this just because they got the nose out of joint over this, that, or the other. So it's frustrating for everyone that's involved. The major series is, as I said, we're not directly affiliated with iRacing, but obviously we use their platform and their service, and we pay for that. But we're affected by it too. But anyway, I think iRacing have done a good job of dealing with it in the short term, and hopefully they do in the long term as well. And then we can get to doing some of those nice to have enhancements and improvements to the iRacing service that is going to benefit leagues like Majors Series and plenty of others that are out there as well. Go on, Ed.
Sorry to jump in. There's a question that I have to ask, which I would love to know the answer to. So maybe to Mike, is there a contingency plan in place for some big disruption to, let's say, a huge event like the Majors 24? In my head, I like to think that there's a red envelope or something a glass thing that you smash when half of the servers go down in the middle of the 24.
Yep.
How do you think about tackling things like that?
Yeah, so we have a standing protocol. Basically, if a race, and the 24 is probably the worst example, meaning the one that would be the most that would test this the most. But for most of our races that are 4 hours or less, if the race is less than 50% completed, and we were to have a massive service outage, whether it's a DDoS or whether it's just simply the servers going down, who knows? If that were to happen, we would restart the races and we would start fresh. And in theory, we would do it right then, assuming the service came right back. If the race is more than 50% complete, the race would become official, and that would be that. Now, if the race was less than 50% complete and you had a DDoS or something more significant on the server side, even from iRacing's perspective, and they didn't come right back up, then we would have to think about, are we rescheduling this race, and to when it would, normally we would reschedule it to the exact same start time, time of day and day of week, but we would push it back a week or more, knowing and having respect for people's schedules, because, the theory being that if you can race at 6 o'clock on Saturday night for the Pacific region, then you can race at 6 o'clock on Saturday nights in general, right? Now, that's not going to be the case for every single person, and somebody's going to get screwed in that, but that would be the way to handle it so that the least number of people did. So again, first priority would be to complete the race that same night, if at all possible. If the race was already over 50% completed when this happened, we would make it official, and if not, we would start it over from scratch.
Anticipating absolutely every possible scenario to the nth degree, and what the protocols or processes would be if that was to occur, is nigh on impossible, because as many ideas as you can come up with, there'll be 10 times that many actual eventualities or reasons that something could occur. Guys, it's been a great discussion around what the DDoS, because I'm a cool kid now,
Nice.
DDoS attack meant for iRacing, and some other development priorities and potential avenues that iRacing might have in the future. So thank you both for your time. Listeners, send through the sorts of things that you would like to see iRacing develop, enhancements or improvements that they could make to the service that would make the biggest difference to you. It doesn't have to necessarily be with a major series focus, but just things that are most important to you. And then maybe we can have another discussion again in a month or so's time around some of those things, and potentially even how we might be able to influence someone within the iRacing service to get some of those things done. So yeah, again, thank you, both of you, for your time. We'll check in with both of you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Garren.
Thanks for listening to Inside the Majors. Keep an eye out on the Discord and the emails for future episodes coming out soon.